I'm Ren, 34, a trauma-informed art therapist and the cousin they always seem to forget. The wedding was at the Hollow Crest Vineyard, just outside Santa Barbara, with rolling hills kissed by late September sun and enough hydrangeas to drown a florist. I remember stepping out of my car, the hem of my black silk jumpsuit brushing the gravel, and the air smelling like lavender and money. I clutched the navy envelope in my hand, cream cardstock with my name embossed in gold, Miss Wren Holloway. No +1. The usher at the edge of the lawn gave a quick once-over. "Oh, guest list is to the left," he said, nodding vaguely toward a chalkboard easel dripping in eucalyptus leaves. He didn't take my name, didn't offer a smile. I walked past clusters of guests with champagne flutes and loud laughter. Past my Aunt Jody waving at someone over my shoulder but not at me, and past my cousin Elise, the bride, who was bent over laughing with two bridesmaids in matching blush tulle. Her laugh, I remember, felt like glass. I stood still near the arbor, waiting for someone to notice. No one did. It wasn't just that I didn't get a +1. It was that they didn't expect I had anyone to bring, that I'd come alone, sit alone, eat alone, because I always had. A server in a black vest paused beside me with a tray. Sparkling water or rosé, I reached out for the rosé. He pulled the tray back slightly. "Sorry, this is just for the family." I looked at him. I am family. The moment stretched too long. He set down a single flute. I took it, fingers trembling. If you've ever been through something like this, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too. I found my name tag pinned to a table card tucked way back by the fountain table 9. No centerpiece, no favors, no chair cover, just a napkin folded flat, a single place setting, and 7 empty chairs around me. They sat all the friends together at table 3, all the cousins at tables 1 and 2. My uncle's secretary, Gwen, was seated at table 4. Table 9 was the invisible table, the one for polite obligation. Behind me, someone whispered, "Didn't she used to do painting or something?" I felt my cheeks burn. I ran my finger along the edge of the glass, stared into the distance, and tried to disappear. That's when the noise around the tent hushed. A soft murmur spread like a ripple. Someone was arriving late. He walked with quiet precision. Tall, dark navy suit. Worn brown leather bag slung over one shoulder. People craned their necks. A few narrowed their eyes. One bridesmaid gasped. "Is that?" Elise whispered, her voice cracking the air. It was Dr. Robert Levin, their old therapist, and he walked straight toward me. "Ren," he said, with a warm, deliberate smile. "Thank you for inviting me." My heart pounded. I stood slowly. The chatter faded into a hush. "I didn't know you two knew each other," Aunt Jody called cautiously. Dr. Levin adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. "We go way back. She's spoken at 2 of my retreats. A brilliant mind." Eyes turned. Whispers froze mid-sentence. Someone dropped a fork. And for the first time in years, they were all looking at me, not past me, not around me, just me. I didn't sit right away. For a long moment, I stood next to Dr. Levin, heat crawling up my neck. I was aware of every breath, every pair of eyes. Elise's mouth was slightly open, like she was trying to form a word and couldn't find one. Her groom, Matthew, stood behind her looking as though someone had shown up wearing a white dress, too confused, panicked, performatively calm. Then Dr. Levin pulled out the chair next to mine, the one no one expected to be filled. "Shall we?" he said, gesturing with a polite smile. I sat, and so did he. The clink of cutlery returned. Conversations resumed, but not the same way. The volume was softer, more strained, like everyone was now conscious of being overheard. I looked down at the place card beside mine, hastily scribbled in a different handwriting, guest of Ren. I could tell it had been added last minute, same ink as the seating chart outside. You sure you're okay with this? I murmured to Dr. Levin as the waitstaff began placing arugula and burrata in front of us. He chuckled softly. I've been stared at in much more hostile rooms. And anyway, this was your idea. Remember? I honestly didn't think you'd say yes. He shrugged, folding his napkin neatly. You asked with kindness and curiosity. That's rare. We clinked water glasses. Mine trembled a little. His didn't. He had been their family therapist for 3 years. Saw Elise through her self-actualization journey after her engagement to a man she didn't marry. Sat with Aunt Jody and Uncle Ron when their son moved abroad without telling anyone. Heard about every family feud, every hidden betrayal, and every false olive branch. He'd stepped down, citing burnout. No one had seen him in a year. Until today. You know, he said, eyes twinkling as he took a sip of sparkling water. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm now the +1 to a woman. Your family once tried to convince me was emotionally unfit. I blinked. They said that repeatedly, at least until I asked if they were projecting. That made me smile small, involuntary, real. He glanced around. Who's who again? I pointed subtly with my eyes. Table 2, closest to the cake. That's Elise's best friend, Katie. She once told me to keep my energy low during a group vacation because Elise was going through a breakup. Dr. Levin nodded. Yes? Boundaries by convenience. And over there, I added. That's my brother Nathan and his wife Lila. They had 3 kids in 5 years and believe I've failed at life because I live alone in a 1-bedroom with a rescue cat and too many plants. What's the cat's name again, Clove? He laughed out loud. It was the kind of laugh people noticed. Katie turned. Elise turned. Aunt Jody turned. It was like being back in high school, except this time the popular table wasn't laughing at me. Dr. Levin leaned forward. You don't owe anyone smallness. Ren. Especially not here. I exhaled. I hadn't even noticed I was holding my breath again. Then came the toasts. First, the maid of honor, who made an offhand joke about Elise always being the organized one because some of us were more creative types, like Ren. The guests laughed, some nervously, others a bit too earnestly. My knuckles whitened around my fork. Dr. Levin didn't flinch. He turned to me and said, loud enough for the table to hear, creative types built the world. And just like that, the laughter paused again. Later, during the groom's brother's speech, I stood up to excuse myself and walk along the vineyard edge for a minute. The golden light was softening into amber, and the distant hills glowed like something from a dream. I took off my shoes and let the dirt press into my soles. A soft voice approached behind me. Ren, I turned. It was Lila, my sister-in-law, always impeccably dressed, always balancing a baby on one hip and a passive-aggressive comment on her lips. No one told me you were bringing someone. I kept my tone even. I didn't think I needed permission. Her eyes narrowed slightly. It's just kind of dramatic. Don't you think bringing him of all people? I met her gaze. You mean a man who knows every version of this family that you'd rather forget? She looked like she might say something else, but then she didn't. Instead, she asked, why now? Because I was tired of showing up like a shadow. She blinked, and for a moment, I saw something in her, maybe recognition, maybe fear, but she said nothing else. When I returned to the table, Dr. Levin had stacked both our dessert plates with slices of lavender almond cake. Your cousin Elise insisted, he said, smirking. She said, and I quote, "Let the guest of honor try everything." Guest of honor. She didn't mean it kindly. I laughed. A real one this time. As the sky dimmed and lanterns flickered to life along the trellises, something started to shift. People approached. Katie hovered nearby and then asked what retreats I'd spoken at. Uncle Ron asked me if I was still doing that psychology stuff and offered a stiff pat on the shoulder. Even Elise, in her $4,000 gown, made her way over with a champagne flute and a forced smile. "I didn't realize you and Robert were close." Dr. Levin stood to the side, watching the grapevines sway gently in the breeze. "Giving us space," I replied. "We've been colleagues for years." Her expression flickered. "You should have told me. You should have asked." She shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward her photographer who was waiting by the floral arch. "Well, I hope you enjoyed the cake." I did. "Thanks." We didn't say more, but as she walked away, I saw her glance back once, over her shoulder, uncertain, curious. Back at the table, Dr. Levin raised his glass. "To creative types," he said. I clinked mine against his. To shadows finally stepping into light. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't hiding. The night wore on like a silk glove dipped in champagne smooth. Cold. Slightly suffocating. Fairy lights blinked overhead like stars trying too hard. And soft jazz floated from the tense speakers as the bride and groom took turns hugging drunk relatives and adjusting for photo ops. At table 9, Dr. Levin and I were still seated, half watching the dance floor, half people watching like anthropologists, observing a kingdom ruled by passive-aggressive toasts and monogram napkins. "Did you notice they seated us next to the portable toilets?" I asked, nodding toward the hedge wall behind us that barely concealed the rows of white rental stalls. He smirked. "Every royal court has its outcasts. Ours just happened to smell faintly of eucalyptus disinfectant." It was meant as a joke, but I could feel it, that itch under the skin that comes when years of being less than finally start to surface. My hands were resting quietly in my lap, but my jaw was tense. People were smiling at me now, saying hello, mentioning things they'd just heard about my work. But no one had really asked where I had been the last 10 years. No one had asked why I'd been gone. That story didn't fit on the seating chart. A waiter brought coffee. I took mine black. Always have. It steadied me. Aunt Jody approached with that heavy-footed grace she reserved for when she wanted to look casual, but carried the weight of a matriarch out for inspection. "Well," she said, eyes landing on Dr. Levin like a landmine she thought she'd buried. "Didn't expect to see you here." He offered a cool nod. Wren extended the invitation. I was honored. She smiled tight. Of course she did. Then to me, as if we were back in her kitchen during a holiday I was half invited to, she added, "You really didn't think to just RSVP, no?" I stared at her. "I'm sorry." Aunt Jody flicked invisible dust off her bracelet. "I mean, bringing someone like him, it's a distraction. Elise's big day. She's been planning this since high school. Everyone knows that." I breathed slowly through my nose. I didn't realize Elise owned exclusivity on public healing. Jody's eyes narrowed. Just slightly. "This isn't about healing. It's about family. And harmony. Something you've always struggled with." I looked at her, then at my coffee, then back again. "You mean compliance?" Dr. Levin set down his cup. Now empty. "Perhaps now is not the time." "No." I cut in softly. "This is exactly the time." I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just spoke clearly. "You all invited me out of guilt. No +1 because no one thought I'd have someone. Table 9 because you assumed I wouldn't mind. No photos. No mentions. Not even a hug from Elise when I arrived. You invited me. But you didn't want me here. The people nearby went silent. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't trembling. I was just tired. And now that I've shown up with someone who reminds you of all the things you've swept under the rug, suddenly I'm a disruption. Aunt Jody's lips parted, ready to counter. I didn't let her. I won't apologize for taking up space anymore. And I sat back down. Not angrily, not dramatically, just with finality. Jody stood there for a second, her hands tightening around the clutch she never let go of, then walked away without a word. A couple seated nearby gave me a discreet nod. A younger cousin I hadn't seen in years made eye contact and mouthed, "Thank you." Dr. Levin tilted his head. "You did well. I didn't do anything. You took your seat." We were quiet for a while after that. The wedding rolled on, more dancing, more speeches, more curated joy, but I stayed in my chair, sipping coffee, watching the performance. It didn't make me bitter. It just made me clear. I hadn't planned to say anything tonight, but maybe something in me was done waiting for the perfect time. The thing about family is, they write your character into a story they started long before you were old enough to speak. And if you're not careful, you spend your whole life trying to earn lines in a script you didn't agree to. I reached for my phone under the table and opened a message I'd typed but never sent. It was to Elise, dated 3 weeks ago. I had written, "Hey, I saw the invite. No +1. I wanted to ask if that was intentional or just an oversight. I'm not trying to start anything, just want to understand where I stand." I had never hit send. Looking at it now, I realized that message was never really for her. It was for me, hoping I could translate silence into something safer. I deleted it, and then I tapped open my camera and took a photo of table 9. Empty chairs, my coffee, a crumpled napkin, Dr. Levin mid-sip. A moment I wanted to remember not because it was elegant or celebratory, but because it was mine. At that moment, the band began to play a slow jazz version of Moon River, and Elise and Matthew took center floor for their first dance. Everyone clapped. Some cried. I clapped too. Not out of spite, not even out of politeness, but because they got what they wanted. And I got what I didn't know I needed. Dr. Levin leaned in, voice low. "You know, there's a term we used to use in narrative therapy, counterstorying. It's when you take the story others have written for you, and you rewrite it not out of revenge, but out of survival." I looked at him. "What's this chapter called?" He smiled. "The one where you brought the therapist as your date and made the whole vineyard blink." I laughed. I really did. Not out of bitterness, just release. As the dance ended and people gathered for group photos, I stood up and walked toward the tent's edge where the cool night air drifted through. A little girl, maybe 10 years old, ran past me in a pink tulle dress and paused. "You look like someone from a movie," she said. I crouched to her height, amused. "What kind of movie?" She thought hard. "One where the quiet girl turns out to be magic." I touched the corner of my eye. "That's a good one." And then she was gone. I returned to my table. To Dr. Levin, to the silence I no longer found uncomfortable. Not a single person asked me to join the group photo, but I didn't mind, because I wasn't just in the frame now. I was finally the one holding the camera. Later that night, after most of the cake had been devoured and the dance floor was littered with petal-shaped confetti and half-full flutes, I stood by the wine barrel bar, watching a server refill the Pinot Noir decanter. My heels dangled from my fingers. The gravel had started to dig into my soles, but I didn't mind. The ache felt honest. Dr. Levin had stepped aside to take a phone call from a former patient, someone in crisis. He mouthed. He held up a finger, apologetic. I nodded. I understood. In that moment alone, I could feel it again, the press of old invisibilities returning, trying to sink back into the skin like a bruise healing in reverse. I was no longer the center of attention, and that was fine. But the silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with echoes. Someone tapped my shoulder. It was Nathan, my older brother. He had his hands in his pockets and a cautious look on his face, like he was approaching a wild animal that had just stopped snarling. "I've been looking for you," he said. I turned slowly. "You knew where I was?" He hesitated. "Yeah, I did." We stood awkwardly, the lights from the nearby dance floor casting him in alternating shades of warm and cold. He looked like a man who used to bully me under the table at Thanksgiving, and now didn't know if he had the right to speak my name. "You made kind of a splash tonight," he said, trying for a half joke. "I wasn't trying to," I replied. "I know," he said quickly. "I mean, you were just being you. But still, people are talking. They always talk. They just don't usually talk to me." He shifted his weight, jaw tightening. "That's what I wanted to say." "Actually?" I blinked. "You wanted to say they talk about me, no?" he said, almost frustrated. "I wanted to say I noticed. That I noticed you've been treated like wallpaper for years, and that maybe I helped make that normal." The words hung in the air between us like wet laundry. "Why now?" I asked. He looked down at the gravel. "Because you brought someone who looked at you like you mattered, and because tonight I saw everyone else looking at you the way they should have looked at you all along." His voice caught at the edge. "I'm sorry, Ren. I didn't know what to do with that." I'd imagined apologies so many times before. I had rehearsed how I'd respond, but now that one was standing in front of me, dressed in a wrinkled button-up and uncharacteristic humility, I felt suddenly small. "Okay," I whispered. "Thank you." He nodded and turned to go, but paused. "By the way, I read your article, the one in Psychology Review, about intergenerational silence." My breath caught. "You read it?" I printed it out. "Lila said it helped her understand some things about her mom. And me." I stared at him. He offered a crooked smile. "We were wrong about you. Ren, I wanted to ask, when did I ever say you had the right to define me at all?" But I didn't. Because he looked like a man offering a key to a door he never realized he'd locked behind him. "Dr. Levin returned, slipping his phone into his jacket. "Everything okay?" he asked, eyes searching mine. "Yeah," I said, still stunned. "That was my brother," I gathered. He said gently. We walked back toward the edge of the vineyard where the breeze smelled of rosemary and loam. "Did you ever think," I asked him, "that I'd end up here? Not just at this wedding, but holding my ground?" He gave it a moment. "I hoped you would. But hope's not a plan. You chose to be here. I almost didn't come. But you did." I turned to face the rows of vines, silhouetted now in dark blue under the moon. "I was afraid I'd feel like a stranger again," I admitted. "And do you not a stranger?" I said slowly. "Just something they didn't predict." He laughed. "Even better." We stayed like that a while. The DJ had moved on to upbeat dance tracks. The kids were screaming in joy, barefoot on the grass. Someone tripped over a candle holder. Someone else laughed too loudly. All of it, strangely, felt like background music to something unfolding more quietly in me. I wasn't angry anymore, just released. Then I saw Elise again. She was standing under the arch where the ceremony had taken place hours earlier. The flowers were wilting slightly. Her veil had been tucked into her bouquet, and she looked tired. Not messy, not undone, just human. We locked eyes. She didn't look away, and then she walked toward me. "Doctor." Levin took a cue and stepped back, giving us space. Elise stopped a few feet away. Her makeup was still perfect, but her expression was brittle. "Ren," she said. "Elise, I didn't expect tonight to go the way it did." "Neither did I." She looked around, as if trying to find the right words in the grass. "I didn't think you'd actually come. You invited me. You know what I mean?" I nodded. "Yeah, I do. I didn't think you'd bring him. You didn't think I'd bring anyone." That made her wince. "You've always been the mysterious cousin," she said. I tilted my head. "No. I've always been the quiet one. You just never asked what the silence held." She looked down, biting her lip. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." "I know. I was just trying to have a perfect day." I smiled faintly. "And I didn't stop you from having it." "No," she said softly. "You didn't." There was a long pause. Then she said, almost hesitantly, "I read your workshop bio, the one he posted on his site, about how you help people use art to reframe their grief." I waited. It made me wonder if I ever tried to reframe mine, or if I just painted over it. I nodded. "You did what you knew." "I guess so." She looked up again. "I think maybe I forgot you were still growing, and I froze you in time. In that summer we stopped being close. We hadn't spoken about that summer in 15 years. The summer our grandmother died and everything got tense and strange and quiet between us. No fight, just absence. I didn't say anything. She didn't either. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But we stood there. Still. Honest. And maybe that was enough." Then someone called her name from across the lawn. She gave me a final glance and walked away. I watched her rejoin the party. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt known. Dr. Levin rejoined me. "What did she say?" I took a deep breath. "She remembered something." He nodded. "That's where healing begins." We stood side by side, two silhouettes outside the glow. Not guests anymore. Not decorations. Not afterthoughts. Just witnesses to ourselves. By the time the last song played some half-sincere cover of "Can't Help Falling in Love," most of the guests had drifted into clusters of drowsy conversation. Children were being carried to cars wrapped in blankets, and the catering staff had started their quiet dismantling of joy. Someone had popped a champagne cork into the hedges. Someone else had forgotten their purse under a chair. It was the part of the evening where truth softened and pretense slipped off with the heels and the cufflinks. I sat again at table 9, alone now, tracing the stem of my glass. Dr. Levin had gone to retrieve our coats. He had insisted we not leave without walking one full lap around the vineyard. As a ritual of re-entry, he'd said, "Ever the therapist? Ever the sage?" I stared at the napkin with my name embroidered on it, Ren. Just that. No last name, no title, no connection. They'd made it for me, but I had to wonder, did they even remember ordering it? I put it in my bag anyway. The fairy lights buzzed faintly overhead. I watched Elise dancing with her father, his steps heavier now, a little stiff, but still deliberate. They weren't close. I remembered that much. He'd once asked me at a Christmas dinner if trauma was a real thing or just a trendy buzzword. I hadn't answered. He'd laughed and said, "You always were too sensitive." He dipped Elise carefully. The crowd applauded, and for a second, I let myself look at her not as the orchestrator of this exclusion, not as the girl who laughed when I once wore my grandmother's earrings to a birthday brunch, but simply as a daughter, caught in the swell of a moment, holding tight to something slipping away. I couldn't hate her. I just didn't want to chase her anymore. A few feet away, someone sat down in the chair beside me. Lila. My sister-in-law looked tired. Her updo had wilted slightly, and her dress had a faint wine stain near the hip. She didn't speak at first. Then, You looked beautiful tonight. I raised an eyebrow. Really? She nodded. I mean it. That color looked good on you. Deep green. You should wear that more often. Thanks, I said, cautious. She hesitated. I wanted to say something earlier. When you were walking in, I saw the look on your face when you saw the table, and I froze. I didn't know what to say. You don't have to explain. No, I do, she said quickly. Because I've been in rooms like that too. I've sat at tables where no one knew what to do with me. I tilted my head. Really? My mom was bipolar, she said suddenly. Never diagnosed. Not officially. But it ran our lives like a secret you weren't allowed to say out loud. My aunts always kept me at the kids' table until I was 29, because they thought I might turn out like her. I looked at her, then really looked. I'm sorry, I said. She shrugged, eyes glossy. It's okay. I just wanted you to know I see you. Maybe I should have seen you sooner. We sat in silence for a few moments. Her hand was fiddling with a spoon, spinning it gently. Nathan really respects you, she added softly. He just never knew how to say it. He didn't need to say it, I replied. He just needed to stop making me feel like a visitor in my own family. She nodded. He's trying. We both are. Then she reached into her clutch and pulled out a little envelope. It's stupid, she muttered. But here. I took it. Unfolding the flap. Inside was a small printed photo, me and Nathan, taken years ago. We were in the backyard of our parents' old house. I was maybe 9. He was 11. I had a paintbrush in my hand, and he had a pie tin on his head like a helmet. We were laughing. I found it in an old album last month. Lila said, I wanted to give it to you, to remind you there was a time he didn't know how to hurt you yet. I stared at the photo. I hadn't remembered that day, but it felt familiar. Safe. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. She left soon after, said her babysitter had called twice. I believed her. Dr. Levin returned with our coats, offering one like a gentleman from another era. Ready for that lap I stood, slipping my arms into the sleeves. We walked quietly at first. The vineyard was quiet now, lanterns glowing low, grapevines casting crooked shadows in the dirt. The smell of cut grass and spilled wine lingered in the breeze. Somewhere in the dark, a cicada started up. This is the part of the story where the protagonist returns to the village, he said suddenly. I glanced at him, and what do they find? He smiled. That nothing changed. Except them. I chuckled. I think I'd rather be the supporting character in someone else's epic. He looked at me thoughtfully. You've been cast as the side character for so long. You don't realize you were writing the story the whole time. We passed by the arbor again, now empty. Just a few forgotten rose petals and one glass slipper-looking heel someone had abandoned. It was strange, I thought. How many little pieces of ourselves we leave behind in places where we once tried too hard. We reached the edge of the hill, where the vines dropped into a view of the valley, wide and quiet. I took a deep breath. I was so afraid they'd laugh when they saw me with you, I admitted. Or make jokes. Or worse, ignore us. But they didn't. No, I said. They stared. They whispered. But they saw me. We stood in silence a moment longer. Then he said, You know, you never told me why you invited me. I paused. Because you knew the worst versions of them, and you didn't let it make me hate myself. That's not nothing, he said quietly. No, I agreed. It's everything. We started walking again, taking the long path back to the parking lot where the last few headlights were blinking on. One by one, I glanced back at the vineyard as it disappeared behind us, golden light flickering through the trees. laughter rising like smoke in the distance. I didn't feel excluded anymore. I felt free. Not because they changed, but because I had stopped waiting for them to invite me into something I was never meant to beg for. As we reached the car, I turned to Dr. Levin. I think this is the first wedding I'll remember for my own reasons. He opened the passenger door for me. Then let's make sure it's the last one you attend feeling small. And just like that, we left. Not quietly, not loudly, but completely. We didn't speak much during the drive back. The silence in Dr. Levin's car was a kind I rarely experienced, soft, thoughtful, breathable. The windows were cracked open just enough to let in the hum of crickets and the occasional gust of cool vineyard air. I kept glancing out, watching the rows of grapevines blur past in the dark like ribbons untangling. The dashboard clock read 12:14 a.m. I had been at the wedding for nearly 9 hours. That was longer than I'd spent with most of my extended family over the past 5 years combined. We passed a glowing diner with 3 motorcycles parked out front. A neon sign flickered pies in exhausted red. I thought about asking him to stop, but my body was too heavy for pie. I used to think visibility meant being loud. I said suddenly, my voice low, "Doctor." Levin kept his eyes on the road. And now I think it's just about being undeniable. He smiled gently. You were that tonight. We reached the little guest house I'd rented for the weekend, an old adobe cottage surrounded by lemon trees. I didn't invite him in. That was never the point. But when I stepped out of the car and stood with my hand on the door, I said, "Thank you for standing beside me, not speaking for me, just standing." He nodded. People don't realize how powerful that is. Then, before he drove away, he added, "Ren, you're not an outsider. You're just further along." I stood in the driveway for a long time after the taillights disappeared. There was no grand conclusion waiting for me in that moment. No swell of music, no montage of relatives repenting. Just me, barefoot on cracked tiles, holding my heels in one hand and my own heart in the other. I went inside. I made tea. I didn't drink. I stood by the bathroom mirror and looked at myself, not to fix my hair or remove my makeup, but just to see. The same face they'd always known. The same eyes they'd stopped reading. But now, finally, a version that belonged to me. I climbed into bed without changing. I didn't sleep well, but I didn't feel anxious either. It was like my nervous system had decided to take the night off. In the morning, I scrolled through my phone and found the photo I'd taken at table 9. I posted it to my private account, no hashtags, no tags, no captions, just the image. Someone messaged me an hour later, a distant cousin. She wrote, "Were you really seated alone?" I replied, "Not for long." Then I closed the app and went for a walk. I passed a pair of tourists arguing about trail directions. A hummingbird followed me for half a block. I bought fresh strawberries from a roadside stand and ate half of them before I got back. When I returned, I had 3 more messages waiting. One from Elise. "Hey, I've been thinking about what you said. I'd like to talk when you're ready." I didn't answer. Not yet. Another from Aunt Jody. "No hard feelings. Let's not make this a thing." I deleted that one. And one from Lila. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for being brave." I sat down on the patio. The sun was warm on my knees. The lemons above me were starting to ripen. I peeled one open with my bare hands, juice dripping down my fingers. It tasted sour and sharp and clean. Later that afternoon, I took out the photo Lila had given me, the one of Nathan and me in the backyard. I slid it into the front of my journal and wrote above it, "There was a time before I was made small." Then I turned the page. I spent the rest of the weekend doing nothing particularly important. I read. I stretched. I painted. Just a little nothing serious. Just soft shapes and curious colors. I let the silence in the house move around me like a familiar animal. No wedding speeches, no seating charts, no tight smiles, just breath. The day before I left, I drove back to Hollow Crest once more. I didn't go inside. I just stood at the edge of the fence, watching as another wedding team set up a fresh arbor, white chairs, silk runners, glass centerpieces, new names, new story, same stage. I imagined another guest arriving, holding an invitation without a +1, scanning the crowd for a chair that felt safe, and I made a vow, quietly. To myself, I would never let someone I loved sit at table 9 again, not if I could help it. Not if I could pull a chair closer and say, "You matter," back home, after unpacking. I sent Dr. Levin a handwritten note, not because I had to, but because some thank yous deserved ink. You reminded me that I wasn't invisible. That was the real gift. I never heard back. But I didn't need to. Weeks passed. One morning, while cleaning out my inbox, I noticed a forwarded newsletter from a therapy collective. There was a quote featured in the margin from someone named R.H. It read, "Sometimes healing isn't walking away from the table. Sometimes it's dragging your own chair through gravel just to prove you can sit upright and speak." I smiled. I knew that line. I'd said it. Once. At a workshop. Off script. Raw. He remembered. Months later, Elise and I met for coffee. Not to reconcile, not to rehash, just to sit. We didn't talk about the wedding. We talked about our grandmother, about art, about grief, about what it meant to tell the truth too early, or too late. When we parted, she hugged me lightly and said, "I don't think I ever really knew you." I said, "Maybe now's a good time to start. I don't know if we'll ever be close again, but I know I stopped needing her to approve of me. That was the difference. That was the peace. And whenever someone asks me if I had fun at the wedding, I always laugh and say, it was unforgettable. Because it's strange how certain days keep living inside you. Not like ghosts, but like rooms. And every so often, you pass by and press your hand to the doorknob, just to check if the air inside has changed. That wedding, Elise's wedding, became one of those rooms, not because of its grandeur, or the cake, or even the petty seating politics, but because it marked the moment I stopped asking permission to be seen. I returned to my routine slowly. Clients, workshops, gallery submissions. I picked up a new practice of walking in the mornings before opening my clinic. Just 30 minutes through the park with Clove trailing behind in her soft-shelled backpack. She always made little chirping sounds whenever we passed under trees. It felt like she was reminding me not to disappear into my own head again. The week after the wedding, a few of my clients brought it up, people who followed me online, who'd seen the post of the empty chairs, the glass, the name card. One of them, a 17-year-old with a knack for metaphors, said, "That photo feels like a movie, still like someone realizing the silence wasn't theirs to carry." I remember blinking at her for a few seconds, then writing it down. The story started rippling, not publicly, not virally, but through quiet messages. A former colleague I hadn't spoken to in years emailed to say she'd seen the photo and had to sit down. "You captured something I've felt every Christmas since my divorce," she wrote. "Even Elise's best friend Katie, the one who once told me to keep my energy low, sent a message weeks later. Just a sentence, I think I owe you a very long apology, but I'm still figuring out how to say it." I didn't respond. Not out of malice, but because I wanted her to do the work herself. In therapy, we talk about rupture and repair. Most people think of rupture as the break, but they forget how often the wound comes long before. The rupture is just the moment it finally surfaces. What I felt at that wedding wasn't a new cut. It was the unbandaging of dozens I'd tried to ignore. My mother never asked about the wedding. She texted 2 days later with a link to an article about a woman who turned broken pottery into flower sculptures. No mention of Table 9, no comment on Elise. Just, you might like this. And honestly, I did. I forwarded it to Dr. Levin with a dry caption. Your influence is showing. He responded with a photo of a cracked tea bowl he'd bought in Kyoto. The gold repairs shimmered along the rim. No words. Just the image. That was enough. A month later, I found myself invited to another wedding one of my college friends, Mina. She had always been the kind of person who made sure everyone had what they needed before asking for anything herself. Her invitation came with a personal note. Bring someone, or come solo. Either way, you're getting a front row seat this time. I didn't bring anyone. I didn't need to. At Mina's wedding, I wore the same deep green dress. I pinned my hair the same way, but everything inside me felt different. I laughed without watching who was watching. I took up space without shrinking to fit it. Someone asked me at the reception if I was married. I said no. Then they asked if I was seeing anyone. I said, I'm seeing myself very clearly these days. They didn't know what to do with that answer. But I did. Back at work, I led a group session on inherited silence. It was a workshop about the things we carry because someone else refused to. Most of the room nodded quietly, arms crossed, faces flickering with half memories. At the end, I offered a closing prompt. What room are you ready to leave, even if the door's still open? No one spoke right away. Then someone said, the one where I wait for someone to ask me how I'm doing. Another wrote on a sticky note, the room where my voice is too much, and someone else, a new client who had barely spoken all session, whispered, the one with all the empty chairs. I looked up. My throat tightened. It was happening again. Not the pain, the recognition. The story had left me, but in the way a seed leaves your hand, it was growing in other people now. Sometime in December, Nathan came to my office, unannounced. He brought hot chocolate and a little plant in a cracked ceramic pot. Clove might like this, he said. She doesn't like anything. I joked, letting him in. He stayed for a while. We didn't talk about the wedding directly, but he did ask if I ever wanted to visit the old house, the one we grew up in. Lila and I are thinking of buying it, he said, fixing it up, giving the kids somewhere to know where they came from. I looked at him for a long moment. You sure it's not haunted? He laughed. Probably, but maybe the ghosts are ready to be listened to. I told him I'd think about it. That night, I found the photo Lila gave me again, the one from the backyard. I took a Polaroid of it. I put the original away, but taped the copy to my mirror. Not to dwell, just to remember. Sometimes healing isn't loud. It isn't confrontational or cinematic. Sometimes it's a slow reshaping, like water softening stone, like breath returning after a long-held pause. A few days before the new year, Elise messaged again. I think I'm finally ready to listen. Really listen. Would you meet me for tea? I said yes. Not because I needed her to fix anything, but because it felt good to know I could say yes without needing anything in return. We met at a quiet cafe near the art district. She wore no makeup. She brought no apologies, only questions. What did I never ask you? She said. It felt strange to be heard like that, by someone who once edited me out of every story, but I answered her, slowly, honestly. I told her what it felt like to sit at table 9. I told her about the way my hands shook when I walked in, and I told her how it felt when I realized I didn't need her to look at me for me to exist. We parted quietly. No promises, no resolutions. Just two women walking back into their separate lives, a little more awake. Winter passed with little ceremony, just soft rain, colder mornings, and the hush that only January carries. I didn't see much of my family during that time, and I didn't feel the need to explain why. No group texts, no subtle invitations, no offhand remarks from cousins about missing Ren as if absence were a quirky trait rather than a boundary. I filled the quiet with art. I started a new series in my studio, portraits of chairs. Each painting showed a single chair in a strange or symbolic setting. A velvet dining chair floating in a pool. A rusted metal folding chair in the center of a forest. A child's wooden chair lit by a single beam in an otherwise dark room. And of course, one piece was inspired by Table 9, a gold Chiavari chair half submerged in gravel, with a glass of untouched rosé resting on the seat. I called the collection Uninvited. People came to the opening night with curiosity, some with quiet awe, others with tears. A few asked if it was about family. I told them it was about recognition. Not just wanting it, but reclaiming it. The gallery owner, a quiet woman named Sylvie who had supported my work for years, pulled me aside at the end of the evening. "You know," she said, "these pieces don't feel angry. They feel decisive." I smiled. "That's because I'm not angry anymore. Just done." I shook my head. "No. Just full." The next morning, I got an email from a therapist in Oregon who had seen the online exhibit. She said her clients were discussing the paintings. One woman said she finally understands why she never feels sat with, that her whole life has been about building tables no one sits at. The sentence stayed with me. I wrote it down on a slip of paper and taped it next to my kitchen sink. Days later, Elise sent a package. No note, just a box. Inside was the place card from Table 9, Ms. Wren Holloway. But this time, beneath the name, in her handwriting, she'd added seated, present, witness. I didn't know what to do with it at first. I considered throwing it away. I even walked it to the trash. But something in me hesitated, not because I needed to hold on to the past, but because I finally understood how far from it I'd come. I placed it in a drawer, next to the photo of Nathan and me as children. Not on display, but not buried either. That same week, I got a call from a nonprofit I'd consulted with years ago. They asked if I'd be willing to lead a retreat for survivors of familial estrangement. A weekend in the desert, quiet workshops, group processing, art as reflection. At first, I hesitated. I'd always been more comfortable guiding from the shadows, letting others emerge. But something told me it was time. I said yes. The retreat took place in March, a converted monastery nestled among stone and sand. 12 participants, all women, all carrying the weight of mothers who turned cold, fathers who disappeared, sisters who mocked, brothers who never saw them clearly. The first night, we sat in a circle and lit a candle for every story that had never been allowed in the family home, mine included. On the second day, we painted chairs, not portraits this time, not realistic, just shapes, shadows, colors. I watched as one woman drew hers tipped over, another surrounded hers in flame, one left hers blank. I asked, gently, "Where do you sit in your own life?" That night, we shared stories under the stars. Someone said, "I always thought I was the problem, but now I think I was just too real for people who only knew how to perform." Another whispered, "I spent 20 years sending holiday cards to a family that never opened them, and I just stopped, and it felt like breathing." I spoke last, told them about the wedding, Table 9, the therapist, The moment I stood and didn't shrink, and how it wasn't dramatic. It was just the moment I stopped asking to be tolerated. They listened, not out of politeness, but out of mutual recognition. The final morning, we each wrote a letter not to anyone in particular, but to the version of ourselves we used to be. I wrote mine sitting by a rock, with the sun warming my back. It went like this. Dear Ren, you don't need to beg to belong. Your silence isn't proof of failure. It's where your truth was waiting. You didn't imagine it. The cold shoulders, the jokes that stung, the loneliness even in crowded rooms. You weren't weak for noticing. You were awake. And now, you're no longer waiting at the edge of other people's tables. You've built your own, and it's beautiful. Come sit. I folded the paper and tucked it into the earth beneath a lavender bush. Let it go. Finally. When the retreat ended, I drove home with sand still in my shoes and a lightness in my chest. It was early April when Elise texted again. Mother's Day is coming. I was wondering if you'd like to visit her grave with me. Our mother had passed 5 years earlier. Neither of us had visited the cemetery together. I used to go alone, leave a single white iris and say nothing. This time, I said yes. We met under gray skies. Wind tugged at Elise's coat. I brought the iris again. She brought daisies. We stood in silence for a while. Not awkward, not forced, just still. Then Elise said, I think she would have liked seeing us together. I didn't respond right away. Then she would have liked pretending things were better than they were. Elise smiled, sad and honest. Yeah, that too. I placed the iris on the grave. I've been angry with you for years. I said. She didn't flinch. I know. But I'm not anymore. She nodded. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But when we left, we walked side by side. Not close. Not far. Just side by side. Summer came quietly that year. Not in a blaze of heat, but in those slow, golden ways, the early ripening of peaches at the farmer's market. The familiar hum of air conditioners waking from sleep. The thin linen shirts pulled from drawers like rituals. By June, I had finished my second series of paintings. This one was called Rooms with No Doors. It was quieter than the last, less bold in color, more deliberate in its silences. I didn't post any previews online. I wanted people to walk into the gallery and feel like they'd entered a place that asked them to listen without noise. The night of the opening, I arrived early, not to prepare, but to stand in the space alone. The paintings hung like memories framed but untamed. One piece, the final one in the row, showed a table in a field. No chairs, just a single plate, cracked down the middle, with wildflowers growing out of it. I hadn't named that piece yet. I let it remain untitled. Guests started to arrive slowly, friends, colleagues, strangers who followed the newsletter. A few brought their mothers. One woman walked in holding her partner's hand and whispered, "This is what I was trying to explain." Toward the end of the night, I saw Nathan walk in. He wasn't alone. He had brought Lila, of course, and their kids, 3 of them now, the youngest barely out of toddlerhood. But what surprised me was that he had also brought our dad. I hadn't seen our father in over a year. Not since the terse Christmas brunch where he called my work emotional coloring books and left before dessert. But here he was, in a pressed shirt, standing in front of a canvas that read, "Here is where I was supposed to be asked if I was okay." He stood still for a long time, then turned, saw me, and nodded once. No apology, no explanation, just that. It was enough. Nathan approached me, hands in his pockets, the way he always did when he was unsure of his welcome. "Thought you might not come," I said. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But then I remembered your paintings, always tell me what to say, even when I don't have the words. We stood there for a moment. Then I asked, "Do you remember the backyard?" He smiled. "The pie tin. The fake sword. You painting a cardboard castle. You told me it would never stand. And it didn't," he said. "But you rebuilt it anyway?" That memory held more weight than either of us expected. The night wound down slowly. People lingered. Someone played cello in the corner of the room. I signed a few prints, took a few hands, accepted quiet gratitude from strangers who, like me, had once been seated where no one was supposed to look. Before leaving, Elise came. Late. She had driven in from another town. I hadn't expected her. She wasn't dressed for a gallery, just jeans and a cardigan and no makeup. She walked directly to the untitled painting at the back. The field, the single plate, the wildflowers. She turned to me. "This one's mine," she said. "Isn't it?" I nodded. She stepped closer, looked at it long and hard. "I never said I was sorry for the way I made you feel small." "You did," I said, "but I didn't need it to be perfect. Just true." She swallowed. "Do you want to come next month to Dad's birthday? I'm cooking." It wasn't an obligation. It wasn't even a peace offering. It was just a question. I smiled softly. "Maybe." She smiled back. And that was it. She left before midnight. The gallery emptied. The lights dimmed. I stayed behind with Sylvie, who handed me a glass of water and leaned against the wall beside me. "You ready to title that last piece yet?" she asked. I looked at the wildflowers, then at the empty space around the table. I thought about the wedding, about table 9, about the therapist who stood beside me, about the photo, the note, the retreat, the lavender bush, about the child who told me I looked like magic. And I said, "Call it the seat I took back." Sylvie nodded, and then we locked the doors. I walked home in the quiet. The streets were half asleep. My phone buzzed in my pocket with messages I didn't check. In the morning, I made tea and fed Clove. The sun came in like an old friend, and I sat at my kitchen table, just me, a chipped mug, and the softness of a woman no longer waiting for permission to be real. Not angry, not invisible, just here, and finally, fully seated.